What if the biggest mystery surrounding North Korea is not its nuclear arsenal, but whether anyone would actually come to its rescue when the shooting begins? For more than 70 years, the Korean War has never officially ended, leaving the peninsula balanced on an uneasy ceasefire that could collapse without warning. While South Korea can immediately count on powerful allies, the real question is whether Pyongyang's supposed partners would risk everything for its survival. Russia and China both claim close strategic ties with North Korea, yet their promises become far more complicated when real battlefields replace diplomatic speeches. By the end of this story, you may discover that North Korea's greatest security guarantee is not its allies at all, but the interests those allies refuse to sacrifice. To understand who might stand beside North Korea in another Korean war, we first have to remember that the conflict has technically never ended with a permanent peace treaty. Since the armistice was signed, both Koreas have spent decades preparing for the possibility that a temporary ceasefire could suddenly collapse into another devastating war. South Korea has built a powerful network of military partnerships led by the United States, giving Seoul immediate access to advanced forces, intelligence, and logistical support. North Korea, by contrast, has become one of the world's most politically isolated states, forcing many observers to question whether it truly has dependable allies left. That uncertainty has grown even more important as tensions across Northeast Asia continue rising through missile tests, military exercises, and increasingly hostile political rhetoric. Everything changed when Russia and North Korea signed a new comprehensive strategic partnership treaty that immediately attracted attention from governments and security analysts around the world. The agreement appeared to revive memories of Cold War alliances that many experts believed had faded after the collapse of the Soviet Union decades earlier. One clause received particular attention because it stated that each country would assist the other if one became the victim of an armed attack. On paper, those words sounded like the foundation of a powerful military alliance capable of reshaping the strategic balance across Northeast Asia. Yet international politics rarely operates according to written promises alone, because every treaty is ultimately tested by national interests rather than diplomatic language. Russia currently faces enormous military demands as its armed forces remain deeply committed to the prolonged conflict in Ukraine. At the same time, North Korea possesses something Moscow urgently needs, including vast stockpiles of artillery ammunition, rockets, and other conventional military equipment. Reports indicate that military cooperation between the two governments has expanded significantly through growing exchanges of weapons, technology, trade, and economic assistance. In return, Pyongyang benefits from increased access to food supplies, raw materials, foreign currency, and broader economic opportunities despite international sanctions. These mutual advantages have encouraged many analysts to describe the relationship as one built upon practical necessity rather than deep ideological loyalty. That distinction matters because partnerships based primarily on immediate interests often become fragile when circumstances begin to change. If the battlefield no longer serves both governments equally, even the strongest public declarations can quickly lose much of their practical value. History repeatedly demonstrates that alliances survive longest when both partners continue benefiting from cooperation under changing strategic conditions. The real mystery, therefore, is not whether Russia and North Korea have signed an impressive document, but whether either nation would willingly pay the enormous price of honoring it during a major war. Before identifying who would actually fight beside North Korea, we must first separate diplomatic symbolism from genuine military commitment, because those two realities are often very different. If Russia appears to be North Korea's newest strategic partner, China remains the country with the deepest historical influence over Pyongyang's survival. During the Korean War, Chinese forces entered the conflict in massive numbers, preventing the collapse of North Korea and permanently changing the course of modern Asian history. That shared experience created a relationship built not only upon political ideology, but also upon geography, security concerns, and decades of mutual strategic calculation. Even today, China remains North Korea's largest trading partner, supplying much of the food, fuel, and commercial activity that keeps the isolated economy functioning. However, this partnership has never been as unconditional as many people assume, because Beijing has repeatedly demonstrated frustration with Pyongyang's unpredictable behavior. North Korea's nuclear weapons program has often placed China in an uncomfortable position between supporting its neighbor and protecting its own international interests. Beijing has even supported international sanctions and imposed additional economic pressure when North Korean missile and nuclear tests threatened regional stability. Those decisions revealed that China values long-term stability far more than rewarding actions that could trigger a dangerous military confrontation. Chinese leaders understand that another Korean War would almost certainly draw the United States into the conflict, creating enormous political and economic consequences throughout the region. Just as importantly, a major war could produce millions of refugees crossing the Chinese border while disrupting critical trade routes and international investment. For those reasons, Beijing has consistently signaled that it prefers preventing conflict instead of preparing to fight one on North Korea's behalf. China has also indicated that its willingness to intervene would depend heavily on how any future conflict actually begins. If North Korea were attacked without provocation, Chinese leaders might feel stronger legal and strategic pressure to provide meaningful assistance. On the other hand, if Pyongyang launched the first strike, Beijing would have far greater incentive to remain cautious and avoid direct military involvement. Beyond Russia and China, several other countries maintain varying degrees of cooperation with North Korea, but none possesses both the capability and motivation to intervene decisively. Iran shares military technology, missile expertise, and strategic interests with Pyongyang. Yet the enormous geographic distance makes direct intervention highly impractical. Nations such as Syria, Egypt, Libya, and several African states have maintained military relationships with North Korea at different points in history, mostly involving training, advisors, or arms sales. Those connections demonstrate diplomatic outreach rather than genuine collective defense arrangements capable of supporting a large-scale war in Northeast Asia. When each potential partner is examined carefully, most appear constrained by domestic challenges, regional priorities, or simple military limitations that outweigh political friendship. The evidence therefore suggests that North Korea possesses numerous diplomatic contacts, but remarkably few allies willing or able to transform political support into meaningful battlefield assistance. After examining every major relationship, one conclusion becomes increasingly difficult to ignore, because not all allies are willing to fight when the costs become overwhelming. Russia certainly possesses the military capability to support North Korea, but capability alone does not guarantee political willingness during an international crisis. Moscow would have to weigh every decision against its broader strategic priorities, economic pressures, and the continuing demands created by the war in Ukraine. Opening another major front in Northeast Asia could stretch Russian military resources while increasing diplomatic isolation and economic consequences. Even the language contained within recent agreements leaves room for political interpretation, allowing leaders to justify different responses depending on the circumstances. China faces an equally complex calculation, although its priorities differ significantly from those of Russia. Beijing's greatest objective is preserving regional stability, because economic growth and international trade remain essential pillars of its national strategy. A prolonged conflict on the Korean peninsula would threaten supply chains, financial markets, and the broader balance of power throughout the Asia-Pacific region. Chinese leaders must also consider the possibility of massive refugee flows, humanitarian emergencies, and the risk of direct confrontation with American forces. Those realities make caution a far more attractive option than immediate military intervention, regardless of diplomatic rhetoric. The outcome could also depend entirely on who fires the first shot, because that single moment would shape international opinion and legal justification. If North Korea became the clear victim of an unprovoked attack, both Russia and China would face much stronger pressure to demonstrate that their security commitments carry genuine meaning. If Pyongyang initiated the conflict instead, both governments would gain stronger political arguments for limiting their involvement or restricting assistance to diplomatic and economic support. Such support could include intelligence sharing, humanitarian supplies, financial cooperation, or military equipment instead of sending large combat formations into battle. History repeatedly shows that major powers often prefer indirect assistance because it reduces risk while still protecting important strategic interests. Smaller partners with friendly ties to North Korea would likely issue statements of political support, but few possess either the capability or incentive to alter the battlefield. In the end, every government would calculate whether defending North Korea serves its own national interests before honoring past promises. That reality reminds us that alliances are rarely built upon friendship alone, because they ultimately survive through shared strategic benefits. North Korea may have several diplomatic partners, yet only Russia and China possess the influence to affect the outcome of a future war in any meaningful way. Ironically, the strongest protection North Korea may receive is not the certainty that its allies will fight, but the shared determination of those allies to prevent such a war from ever beginning. So, if another Korean war erupted tomorrow, the greatest uncertainty would not be North Korea's military strength, but whether its allies would truly stand beside it when the costs became unbearable. The evidence suggests that Russia and China remain Pyongyang's only partners with the capability to make a meaningful difference. Yet both have far stronger reasons to prevent war than to fight one. Every treaty, every public statement, and every diplomatic promise ultimately faces the same test when national interests collide with the realities of the battlefield. History has repeatedly shown that alliances often appear strongest in times of peace, but reveal their true limits only after the first shots are fired. Perhaps the most fascinating question is not who would save North Korea, but whether any nation would risk everything to honor its promises when the future of an entire region hangs in the balance.